have a seat, have a seat. Now, who here has ever lived in Texas? All right, well, we got a little bit more verbal response. Okay, so I don't know if you know this. Texas, oh, you got out the jumping jacks, dude. That was smart. 10 jumping jacks right now. We got to. Everybody else did them. All right, count for them, count for them. Here we go. 1, 2. Come on. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Give it up for Isaiah. My God, my God. All right, we've been to Texas, right? Texas is different. All right, Texas is different. Okay, let me tell you some of my experience with Texas and Texas things, okay? It was in, I don't know if you know this, in Texas, you're gonna be like, what in the world is this? They have the largest rattlesnake roundup in the world, okay? I don't know if you know this. You go to Sweetwater, Texas, they have like thousands of rattlesnakes in a coliseum, all right? They have a place where they're getting the venom out, where they're doing a demonstration. I mean, like, you didn't even know this much rattlesnakes existed in this coliseum. It's incredible. What they do is they take you to this, if you sign up for it, they'll take you where they actually put the snakes in their natural habitat and like do demonstrations there. Well, when I went, I was real young. I was like 9 or 10, and y'all know me. I'm efficient. I'm like, I gotta be the most efficient. Well, as this quality in me was still developing, it led to some decisions that were less than wise, right? So rattlesnakes on the ground right here, right? And I'm right here, and Mom's over there, and person's right here, and Mom says, hey, Dylan, come here. Now, efficiency, right? Efficiency says point A to point B, right? The smart thing to do would have been to go around and go see my mom. But what 9-year-old Dylan did was point A to point B. Luckily, the snake was not up and ready to strike. I jumped straight over the snake. And as I'm jumping over, it comes up and goes just like that. Just like that. It almost strikes me, right? There's rattlesnakes everywhere. I don't know if you know this, bull snakes eat rattlesnakes. So you don't want to get rid of the bull snakes, right? You don't want to get rid of the bull snakes. Okay, another thing that happened, I almost ate a snake because I thought it was a worm. Now you're like, that doesn't make sense. We had a big pool, right? And I was trying to show off to my brother, and I pull out this worm, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to eat the worm, ha. And it has eyes and a mouth, right? And it's looking at me. I'm like, ha. Found out it's this rare thing called a Texas blind snake, right? I almost ate this thing. Because I thought it was a worm. Here's another crazy thing. My sister got stung by a scorpion in her bed. In her bed. She was laying down, and it was on the side of her bed, right? And stung her. These things happen in Texas, but I remember this instance in Texas that, man, it traumatized me, okay? I don't know if you know this, Texas is a place where tarantulas live. Tarantula is this big, I should have got a picture, but I didn't. Tarantula is this big, fuzzy, hairy spider, okay? That's what a tarantula is. They used to be in our pool all the time. They're all the time at the house. Well, this one time, we are in it's a room, we call it a den. We're in the den, and we look over, and probably about from me to Serenity's left toe is a tarantula inside the house, right? This big, all right? This big. Now, I don't know if you know this, a tarantula is the kind of spider that's like, I won't mess with you if you don't mess with me. But if you mess with a tarantula, they will mess with you, right? And so here I am, it's me, my family, all of us, and I'm just like, what y'all freaking out about, man? It's just a tarantula. Like, it's in the house, it's this. I'm like, man, of course, I'm like, again, like 9 or 10, thinking I'm the coolest kid in the world. I'm like, y'all, it's just a tarantula. I kid you not, this is what happened. The tarantula has 8 legs, right? Its front 2 legs hike up like this, right? Hike up like this. I'm like, oh my goodness, what is happening? This 8-legged creature became a 6-legged creature with horns. You know what I'm saying? Right? Like, it's got 8 legs, and it's looking right at me, and he goes, and I'm like, oh my goodness. All of a sudden, I'm like, I don't know why y'all are freaking out. And I start taking a step back. Next thing I know, kid you not, this thing, with its 2 legs up, looks at me and goes straight at me. I'm like, ah! And I take off running. I didn't didn't care about my pride. I didn't care about my dignity. I didn't care about my image. I didn't care about none of that. I was doing everything I could to get out of this situation. I was in a place where it's like, look, I give it all up. I'm done, right? I'm done. And the truth is, when we're put in these moments of we feel like our life's in danger, right? We're willing to give it all up. We're willing to give everything up. We don't care about our image. We don't care about our reputation. We don't care if people are going to make fun of us. They can make fun of us later, but at least I didn't get bit by a tarantula, right? You know what I'm saying? So we're willing to give it all up. And tonight, I want to talk about this concept of giving it up. I have these papers here, if y'all want one. If y'all want one, it's right here. Cool. Cool. Easy to follow along. You need a pen? You got a pen? You need a pen? Here we go. Forgot to pass them out. Got right to my segue and forgot to pass them out. Here we go. Anybody else? You need a paper? Anybody else? Good? Cool. Hey, you never know. All right. So tonight, I want to talk about this concept of giving it all up. Now, I know what you're thinking. Here we go. Another message on you got to give it all up for Christ, right? Pastor Dylan, I've gone to church before. This is not my first time. I know that if I'm going to serve God, I've got to give it all up. I can't just hold some things back. I got to give God everything. And guess what? You're right. That's the message tonight. The message is we have to be willing to give it all up for Christ. But a lot of times we say that, but we don't really talk about the why. Okay, I get it. I'm supposed to give it all up for Christ. But why? Why am I supposed to give it all up for Christ? And I want to tell you a little story today that's from the Bible that's going to really give this perspective of why we're supposed to give it all up. And actually, I'm not going to tell the story, but y'all are going to tell the story. So, I have some volunteers wrote down. I need Matthew. I need Maya. I need Serenity. I need Caleb. And I need, come on, Luke. All right, don't mess the story up, though. All right. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read this story, okay? And y'all are going to act out the story as I read it, okay? Okay? Here we go. All right. Everybody, I want you to meet King Xerxes. Oh, yeah. All right? Everybody say, hey, King Xerxes.
What up, King Xerxes?
Hey, this dude's the king. He's the king. This dude's a king of 127 different lands. All right? Different provinces. Right now, he's in this place in this story where he's ruled over this land, Susa. Now, again, y'all gotta act it out. This is on y'all, right? Now, my boy King Xerxes, I mean, he's the king, right? So what he says goes. What he says goes, right? And he decides he's going to have a little party with all of his friends, right? And at the party, he's not the wisest king, right? He has a little too much to drink, okay? He's not really serving God like he's supposed to, okay? So, Serenity. This is funny. All right. King Xerxes decides he wants to get the queen to come in and have all of his friends look at how beautiful she is. All right? Now, obviously, her name's Vashti. Everybody say, what up, Vashti? Read the scripture. It's in there. That's literally her name, right? Vashti's like, I ain't doing that, you little pervert. I'm not doing that, right? She's like, I ain't going to come so all your little friends can look at me, right? So King Xerxes like, okay, you want to do that? Guess what? You're not queen anymore. Everybody say, bye, Serenity. Says, you're not queen no more, right? No, you're good. Give it up for Serenity. You're a Vashti. Short lived, but she did the right thing, right? This is a real, true story, okay? Next, we have Esther. All right? Now, the king said, obviously, there needs to be a new queen. So the king's like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a queen tryout. And I'm going to bring in all of these different ladies and have them pampered and give them royal treatment and all of this stuff, okay? I'm going to do that. That way, I can pick who's queen. Well, guess what? Esther won. Esther is the new queen. Everybody say, hey, Esther. Now, here's what's important about Esther. Esther is a Jew, which means Esther is God's chosen people, right? Esther is part of God's chosen people, and Esther really loves God. Now, Esther was adopted by a guy named Mordecai.
What up, Mord?
Give it up for Mordecai. So, Esther is Mordecai's adopted daughter. Now, Mordecai is that guy that always does what's right. Mordecai always does what's right, even when he doesn't get recognition for it. Like, one day, Mordecai was just chilling outside the king's gate, just doing his thing. And Mordecai heard these two people talking about how they wanted to kill the king. So Mordecai, obviously, knowing that that's wrong, got some of the king's officials and said, hey, there's some people that want to kill the king. And so the officials took care of it, had those people killed. But guess what? Mordecai didn't even get any recognition. No recognition. The only thing that happened for Mordecai was he got his name written in a book that said, oh yeah, this dude Mordecai one time, he protected the king this one time. So that's all Mordecai got was this recognition, as recognition was that he got his name written in a book. But then, our last character doesn't get much introduction, but he's a big part of the story. Everybody meet Haman. We don't like Haman. Everybody go, boo! Boo. We don't like Haman. Now, we don't like Haman, but the king really does like Haman. Hey. The king likes Haman, right? Yeah. And he put Haman in a high position of honor. Right? He put Haman in a high position of honor. Haman had a problem, though. Haman was one of the most prideful people alive. Haman thought he was that dude. Right? He was that dude. All right. So now we know our characters, right? Let's get into the story. All right? I don't know if you know this, but we've already gone through 2 chapters of the Bible. Right? So we're on chapter 3 now of Esther. Now, all these people bowed to Haman because of who he was. All right? So y'all are the people, y'all don't actually have to bow, but pretend like y'all are bowing. All these people bowed to Haman because of who he was. And this really fed into his high ego that Haman already had of himself, right? But there was one person that didn't bow. Mordecai. And now our rivalry starts to form. This made Haman furious. He was mad. From this day forward, Haman now hated Mordecai, and Mordecai was his number 1 enemy. So you don't like Mordecai now. Hey. Haman hated Mordecai so much that he said, I'm going to kill Haman. As a matter of fact, I'm not just going to kill Haman, I'm going to kill all of his people. Now, Mordecai's a Jew. Esther's a Jew. So Haman has a plan to kill all of Mordecai's people, which includes Mordecai and Esther. Now, so Haman has this idea. He knows he's good buddies with the king, and so the king will probably allow him to do whatever he wants. So he gets permission from the king to have all the Jews killed. So he actually got permission from the king to have the Jews killed. And again, Mordecai and Esther are both Jews. Let's go to chapter 4. So now Mordecai's in this bad position, right? You're in this bad position. So he comes up with an idea. He's like, look, I don't really have this kind of influence that I need to change something. So he asks his daughter Esther, the queen, for help, right? And he figures since the king already really likes Esther, that she can talk the king out of it. But Esther gets scared. Esther gets scared. She thinks that if she comes to the king without permission, she's going to be punished by death. Which is realistic, by the way. The king could have actually said, you're going to die, right? Yep. So Mordecai tells his adopted daughter the reality of the situation. He says, look, God is going to come through whether you help out or not. And Mordecai believes that with God, victory will come no matter what. So he tells Esther that he's giving her the option to be a part of what takes place. He even tells her, this is important, he even tells her this might be the reason God put her in position to be queen to begin with. That's an important part of the story, right? Okay, chapter 5. You ready? We're moving along. This convinced Esther, and she goes to the king and asks help for the Jews.
I need help.
And so what she asked, now Esther's kind of smart, you're going to see in this story. What she asked is she asked for a banquet that only her, the king, and Haman can go to.
May I have a banquet?
Sounds kind of crazy, right? And when they're at this banquet, the king says, Esther, what is it that you want?
What is it that you want?
He even tells her, look, you can have up to half my kingdom.
You can have half my kingdom.
Nice. So Esther's like, I want another banquet.
I want another banquet.
Okay? So she wants the same people to attend, and so the king allowed it. Now, when Haman left the banquet that night, I mean, he's feeling pretty good about himself, right? I mean, think about it. Haman just got invited to a banquet with just the king and queen and himself. He feels like he's an important guy, and this really builds his pride. So Haman left the banquet that night in a really good mood. But then he saw someone on his way home that kind of ruined his day. He sees Mordecai. He sees Mordecai. He hates Mordecai so much that his entire day was ruined. He was so sad to see Mordecai that he went home crying to his wife and his friends. Now, his wife tried to calm him down and gave him some advice on how to handle the situation. She said, hey, just kill him. So Haman's like, all right. Haman's like, all right, I can do that. She even gave him details of how to do it. She told him to build up this gallows, which is something that they hang people on. And she told him to have Mordecai hung on that and killed. Just kill him, right? Just kill him, hang him. Chapter 6, here we go. So, Blake's liking it. I like it, son. Right. So everyone went to sleep and waited till the next day, right? Haman's like, I got this. I'm going to go tell him to kill Mordecai. It's going to be great. But Haman's like, look, everyone's sleeping. Right now is my chance. I'm going to go to the king right now and tell him my plan. Now, meanwhile, while Haman's on the way, the king's having trouble sleeping. Okay? King's having trouble sleeping. So he's like, bro, I can't sleep. Can someone come read me a story, right? We all know when we can't sleep, we want a good story, right? So his attendant brings him a book. It just so happens to be the very book that Mordecai's kind act earlier was written down in. So in this book, the king learns of this guy named Mordecai that saved his life. And so now the king's like, hey, we have to honor this guy Mordecai. I want to honor this guy Mordecai, but I don't know how to honor this guy Mordecai. About that time, Haman comes into the palace. So the king sees Haman, and he thinks, hey, I can ask Haman how I should honor Mordecai. But he doesn't use names. And so what he does, Haman walks to the king. King's like, hey, come here. And he says, the king says, hey, I want to really honor somebody. How do you think that I should do it?
How do you think I should do that?
Now, this is getting good. Haman, being full of himself, being prideful, is like, king wants to honor somebody. It must be me, right? So Haman's like, you know what, king? If you wanted to honor somebody, I would give them a royal robe and a horse that you have ridden on. Then I would parade that person throughout the land and tell everyone that this is what the king does for someone he desires to honor. Now, here's why this is ironic. Haman was literally coming to ask the king to kill Mordecai. The king was asking Haman how to honor Mordecai. Haman, thinking that the king wanted to honor him, gave the king the way to honor Mordecai. So he tells him all this stuff, and then the king's like, sweet, I want you to go honor Mordecai that way. And Haman's like, what in the world? How in the world did that happen? Now, Here's the rest of the story quickly, right? Ready? To make a long story short, here's what happens. Haman ends up honoring Mordecai for the king. Haman is then killed on the very gallows that he set up for Mordecai, and the entire Jewish population is saved. Give it up for our volunteers doing such an amazing job. All right. Now, this story has this great ending, right? The Jewish population saved. Esther stepped up and then did what she needed to do. Ironic term. By the way, side note, Esther is the only book of the Bible that does not mention the name of God. I don't know if you knew that. It's the only book in the Bible. Somebody may have had that on a trivia question at a Christian club or something like that. But somebody, yeah. All right, only book in the Bible that doesn't mention the name of God. Now, I want to really talk about this moment in chapter 4, okay? This moment in chapter 4, see, the king had just signed this decree for the entire Jewish population to be wiped out. This is equivalent of America saying, hey, we're going to kill all the Christians. That would be what this is equivalent of in this time frame, right? Think about the significance of this. God's chosen people would have been gone forever. Now I want to read what happens in chapter 4. I know we talked about it, but let's really read what happens to see what takes place. It says, when Mordecai learned about all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on burlap and ashes, and went out into the city, crying with a loud and bitter wail. He went as far as the gate of the palace, for no one was allowed to enter the palace gate while wearing clothes of mourning. And as news of the king's decree reached all the provinces, there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, wept, and wailed, and many people lay in burlap ashes. Fast forward a little bit, a few verses. Mordecai gave Hathach a copy of the decree issued in Susa that called for the death of all the Jews. He asked Hathach to show it to Esther and explain the situation to her. He also asked Hathach to direct her to go to the king to beg for mercy and plead for her people. So Hathach returned to Esther with Mordecai's message. Then Esther told Hathach to go back and relay this message to Mordecai. Look, all the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king has not called for me to come to him for 30 days. So Hathach gave Esther's message to Mordecai. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. This is important. This Mordecai's response is really the highlight of the book of Esther. It says, don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place. But you and your relatives will die. Here it is. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same, and then, though it's against the law, I will go to see the king. If I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Now here's what's happening. Esther is in this position of queen. I mean, she's got the high position of honor, right? If anybody's set apart, it's this character Esther. But then this decree comes for all of the Jews to be wiped out. And all of a sudden, Esther's like, whoa, I don't know if that's what I'm called to, right? Like, I have so much to lose here. Like, Mordecai, don't you understand? I have so much life to live. And I'm afraid that a lot of times this is how we act when it comes to our calling, right? I'm okay to be called, but man, I have so much to lose. I have so much to lose, and I have so much life to live, and I don't really know if giving up my life is worth the calling at all. But then he challenges her thinking, and challenges, says maybe who she is and the position she is isn't about her at all, but maybe it's about everyone else. See, I think the American culture has the image of a successful follower of Jesus twisted. We have believed that the true success in our relationship with God comes with our success as well. In other words, if I'm going to be successful in my calling, it doesn't just involve the kingdom of God being successful, it involves me being successful as well. My reputation, my image, the life that I want to live. We've even come to believe that our calling has external success involved with it as well. And because of this, we've come to believe that we are entitled to a sense of control over our calling. I'm entitled to say when my calling comes forth. I'm entitled to say how much I'm going to actually step into my calling. I'm entitled to say when the calling is activated. Don't ask me to go through a process. When I say I'm going to step in my calling one day, I mean that I'm going to step into it one day. That doesn't mean I actually have to do it today, but God's just going to snap his finger and I'm going to be on a stage preaching. Or God's going to snap his finger and I'm going to be winning souls for the Lord, but I don't actually have to change. We've come to believe that we have a say-so of when it's time to step into our calling, how deep we go into our calling, and whether or not we go through a process. And maybe this is why we're quick to throw around the phrase, I'm called, but not actually do anything about it.
Right. Get it.
We live in this highlight calling culture. I know I've talked about this before. And listen, let me just give definition to the calling real quick. Your calling as a believer, your calling to be set apart has nothing to do with a microphone, has nothing to do with the people that you reach, has nothing to do with the image. It has everything to do with being the person that God has created you to be for the time that he's created you to be it, when he's created you to be it, and for you to step into that. If your calling's to reach one person, your calling's to reach one person. If your calling's to reach 1 million, your calling's to reach 1 million. But guess what? You don't get a say-so. You don't get to say how it looks. You don't get to say whether or not you're going to only redo half of it or what it's going to look like. You either get to say yes or no. And the way that you live your life determines your answer to that. See, Queen Esther was set apart. And I'm sure the calling looked really cool, right? I'm a queen. I get royal treatment. I'm living my best life. But Mordecai challenged the idea that the calling was about these things. He said, maybe your calling isn't about looking good and being famous, but maybe your calling is about giving up your own life to save the life of others. Maybe that's what your calling is about. And we've got it twisted. I'm going to be completely honest with you. Anytime any student comes up to me and says, I'm called, my first thought is, why? Why would you want that? Right? Do you understand what you're stepping into? Do you understand the responsibility, the burden, right? If that's what you're called to, yes, do it. But we got to be careful about throwing this phrase around, I'm called, if we're not going to step into it. See, initially, Esther really wasn't about this. She was essentially saying, Mordecai, being called is cool, but I don't know if I want to be called to live a life that is set apart if it's going to cost me my life. Then Mordecai corrects this thinking and says, Esther, I appreciate it, but that's the point. The point is for you to give your life. And I feel like many times we're okay with being called to be set apart, but we want our experience of the calling to be on our own terms. We either want our experience of the calling to take place only at the depth where we want to get recognized or given a title, but don't actually want us to cost something. Don't actually want it to cost us something, or we want to push it to a later time in life. We have this mindset of, I'm going to live that out one day. But right now, man, I'm just a kid. Let me have my fun, right? Let me build my testimony. Whatever that means, right? Some of us have been working on our testimony and not working on our calling. Just saying, right? We got to be careful. We push it off to one day. But listen, I'm tired of saying you're the generation of tomorrow because you're the generation of today. The time is running out, and if not now, then when? If not now, then when? Oh, what I would do to be able to sell out for God in my teenage years. I didn't, right? There's stories of so many people that didn't, but man, what if you did? What if you did? And I feel like we convince ourselves a lot of times that, oh, I'm just ignorant, or I don't really know what I'm doing, or I don't really have that experience or that knowledge, so that's really not for me right now, but that will be for me one day. The Bible says, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set the example in your conduct, in your speech. Set the example in the way that you live your life. And I'm tired of these old people, including myself, getting stuck in their ways, saying, this is how we've always done it. What we need is a generation that says, we're not going to do it that way anymore. We're going to experience the power of the gospel. And that's what happens when you set the example at your young age. Well, I have two things to say about pushing your calling back. Number one, Christianity that costs you nothing is worth nothing. Christianity that costs you nothing is worth nothing. And man, to be set apart, letter Y, you got to yield your youth. Yield your youth. We talked about the yield sign. What is the definition of yield? Yield is to relinquish possession of something or to give something up. So if you're going to be set apart, you can't push off that mark of Jesus to a later time. But it's going to cost you something now, and that something's your life. That something is your desires, your life. What am I saying? So often we think it's okay to be called to live a life that's set apart, but we think that we're entitled to certain things now. We say things like, I'll reach people for Jesus one day, but let me experience the world and build my testimony now. And so what happens is we create this bargaining approach with God. Like, God, you let me have these years, and then I'll give you my later years. What? Right? I'm so glad Jesus didn't take that approach with us. Right? I'll give you like my arm and my right foot, and then you do the same. Right? I don't know if you know this. Okay, we treat Jesus being crucified on the cross like he was just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna die, it's okay. But the moments before Jesus was dying on the cross, he was in the garden sweating blood and saying, God, I don't want to do this. Like, if it's okay, like, if you're cool with it, I'm good to, like, just let humanity figure it out on their own. But, like, me, I don't want to do this, right? But then you say, wait a second. It's not about me, right? And I know I'm going to sacrifice the rest of my life. And I know I have a lot of life to live and all these different things, but not my will, but yours be done. And so we've got to ask ourselves these critical questions. Are we willing to be okay to not try some of the things that our friends are trying? Are we okay with potentially missing out on some relationships and friendships that you may be able to have if you didn't serve God? Because here's what I've come to understand. If you're really going to pursue God, there's going to be things that you have to give up. That's just part of it. And it's not, God's not asking you to give stuff up just so he can be like, I'm in charge. You got to give it up. But he's like, man, I got something better for you, but I can't show you that until you give me access to this area of your life. And here's the deal. I'm just going to be honest with you, okay? It's your choice. It's your choice. And I believe if you only want to go so far with God, you can. But why? I would hate the thought of only going so far with God knowing that he had more for me. And I know some of us are scared to be like, well, I don't know what that life looks like. That's why it's called faith. And again, you will mess up. You're going to mess up, right? When a father is teaching their kid to walk and the kid falls over, he doesn't kick the kid and say, you're a stupid child. What are you doing? Right? He's like, man, we're gonna get it next time, right? And he picks him up and they keep going. Don't be afraid to fail. I remember one time when I first started out in ministry, I was asking my dad something, and he was giving me all the reasons that it wouldn't work because he tried it before. I said, I stopped him. I said, hey, dude, you got to let me fail. You got to let me fall flat on my face. Guess what? He did, and I grew. And it's okay. He was right. But he had to let me fail, right? And a lot of times you're going to fall short in your walk with God. You're going to fall short stepping out to do new things. It's okay. Failure is not a bad thing if you're failing trying and you're growing from that, right? So here are some of the things that you have to be willing to give up. Number one, you have to be willing to give up your plans. This happened to me whenever I moved to Houma, right? I had this idea and this plan, y'all know me, this idea and this plan of what my future looked like, right? I was going to be at that church the rest of my life, doing campus ministries, running school. That's how it was going to be. And God's like, yeah, it's not how it's going to be. Now listen, when God called me to Houma, I believe I had a choice. I could have said no. And I could have stayed right where I was doing, outside of God's will. And I would have felt okay with that, but not a good okay, if that makes sense. I would have had a false sense of okay, right? But I remember opening my door, and God's like, you're going to Houma. You just got to get ready for it. And I said, okay, I don't know what this looks like. I don't know what it's going to entail, but let's do it, right? I had to surrender my plan. I have a friend who, man, this person was pursuing God, right? Chasing after God. They had an idea of what their future held and were set on it, right? Other people's like, this is not the plan for your life. You were called, right? And they said, you know what? No, I'm not going to do this. This is the plan for my life. And they went this other route. And this person's no longer serving God because they wanted to do it their way. They weren't willing to give up their plans. I had this other person that I hung out with and did ministry with. Her name was Taylor, right? And she was serving God. We were doing campus ministry in Mississippi. And Taylor was a good friend. And I remember she told me she really liked this boy. And I was like, this boy is not for you. She's like, I know he's not for me. God said he's for me. But he's so cute. Taylor's now engaged to a girl not serving God. Because she said, I don't care what God said. I'm going to do it my way. Right? Not doing what she's supposed to do. And so we have to be willing to surrender our plans. We have to be willing to surrender our sinful pleasures. I remember one time in my life, I was struggling with this thing, and I went to the pastor I was under at that time, and I was like, hey, I'm gonna just tell him what I'm struggling with, and he's gonna come up with this great, awesome plan of how to overcome this that I didn't think about, right? So I laid it out. I'm like, I've tried everything. What do you got? He looked at me dead in the face and said, it comes down to choice. I was like, that's not what I expected you to say. He's like, you have to be willing to choose to serve God and to lay down your sinful pleasures. And I was like, okay. Maybe it comes down to me, right? Maybe it comes down to not a plan, but I just have to actually choose. I had to lay down my sinful pleasures. You have to lay down your status or idea of what it's going to look like. I remember when I first started in ministry at 18 years old, I was the next famous speaker in my mind. I mean, I'm just going to be transparent with y'all. I remember watching preachers, even writing down their sermons, even preaching their sermons word for word. I was so hungry to be like them, right? I had this idea of that was the goal. The more people and the more followers that I had, that was the goal. And God corrected me so quickly. And God's like, it's not about the stage, it's about the shepherd's heart, right? And he changed my whole pursuit. I had to change my idea of what it looked like. Now, we could talk about so much more that we have to give up that's going to cost us. But here's the truth of what you need to realize. Your calling to be set apart is not about you. It's for the kingdom of God. And the calling is great, and we have to be willing to give ourselves up for the sake of others. I know that this is hard. I know this is not an easy message. I know this is not a, hey, God loves you and everything's great and just have fun, right? I know this is a challenge to go deeper. But I don't want to be misunderstood. I don't want you to think that there's no reward in this, right? All I'm saying is the reward may not be what you've made it out to be. The reward may not be that. What I'm trying to say is that the reward is not building your name, it's building the name of Jesus. We've created this Hannah Montana approach to serving God where we can get the best of both worlds. I can get the pleasures of living a common life, but I also want the joys of living a life that's set apart. Well, guess what? Hannah Montana's fake. That kind of life's fake. And if you're going to do something for God, you got to step into one side or the other and say, I'm going to live set apart. And if you want anything from this message, hear this. You have to be okay with your greatest reward as a Christian not being experienced on earth. You have to be okay with that. It's going to be experienced in eternity. And so what this comes down to, this whole A to Z thing, what it comes down to is the simple question that God's been challenging me with lately. What do you really believe about eternity? What do you really believe about eternity? Because if you really believe that there's a life after this with God, or there's a life in hell where we're going to be separated from God, if you really believe that, it's going to affect the way that you live on earth. But no, we've created this culture where everyone goes to heaven. Oh, they were such a good person. No, they weren't. They did terrible things and didn't serve God. They're in hell. That's real. But to make ourselves feel good, we've softened the truth of eternity and said, oh, everyone goes to heaven, it's okay. But what it's done is it's softened our approach to God, because in the back of our minds, we've believed that everyone goes to heaven anyway, so what's the point of really selling out if I can just do what I want, be a good person, and go to heaven anyway? What do you really believe about eternity? Because if you believe that there's a heaven and there's a hell, then it affects the way that you live your life here on this earth. And I'm not saying we have to be perfect. I think that's another faulty thing that we live in, that this condemnation mindset that says if you don't get one thing right, you're a terrible Christian, you're never going to do anything. No. I'm telling the junior high Sunday, it's not about perfection, it's about progression. It's about moving forward. It's about not staying in the spot that you're at. Sometimes you're going to fall, but we're going to fall forward. We're going to fall growing. We're going to fall being better. It's not about being perfect. But it is about effort. It is about actually trying. It is about not just saying, I'm going to be halfway, but I'm going to go all in. What do you really believe about eternity? We have a junior high student right now. Now, every time that we go to services and we have different events, of course we pray. And sometimes what happens is God will tell me, hey, this service, this message, or this event is for this person. Right? He'll show me those things. And then I'll tell Pastor Alyssa, and she'll be like, okay, well, let's pray. Well, we went to Influence Conference, and there was a certain junior high student that really stuck out to me as I was praying. And I told Pastor Alyssa, I said, hey, this whole conference is, if for nothing else, is for this student. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know God's going to meet this student. Now, whenever, I think it was the second preacher was talking, and he was talking about reaching your campus for Christ. And he was like, I don't want you to come, I don't want you to sign up for this or do this unless you're serious. This junior high student, she's in our ministry, took this seriously and was like, I'm going to do this, right? I'm not gonna play around with this. I'm going to do this. So I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. What I want you to do is I want you to pick one student a week at your school, and I want you to pray for that student for that week. And if you get the opportunity, I didn't even say they had to. I said, if you get the opportunity, I want you to speak to that student about Jesus. They were like, okay. Wednesday, last week, they come to me. Hey, I talked to the student. How did it go? It was awful, they said. Terrible. They told me I was out of line, that I didn't know what I was talking about, and they said they wish they didn't come to school today. I said, great, you're doing what you're supposed to do, right? And I explained it's not about getting them saved, it's about telling them about Jesus, right? And I really thought, be honest, I really thought that was going to kind of fizzle out after that. And I was like, we're going to stick with it, right? We texted the student again this week, hey, who's your student this week? She texted us back and told us the name. Monday, she comes to us. Monday, it's not even 5 days, not even 1 day into the week, comes to us Monday. Hey, I talked to the student. The student said they really needed Jesus. They really needed to hear what we had to offer, and I got the opportunity to encourage them. Now, what happens a lot of times is we get on fire for these things, but then these things fizzle out. And this first experience with this student was, for a lot of us, would be enough to be like, yeah, I don't really want to do that anymore. That's kind of not for me. That made me feel uncomfortable. But this student said, I'm going to take this seriously. The calling's not about me. I'm willing to give up my reputation. I'm willing to give up my status. I'm willing to be made fun of if it means that the gospel of Jesus Christ gets advanced, because I was created for a mission. I wasn't created just to sit in a pew. I wasn't created just to be an absorber, but I was created to take the gospel of Jesus Christ that He changed my life with and to take it to a people that is lost. And your calling is not about you. you. Your calling is not about you getting the highlights, you getting the stage, you getting the names. It's about the same thing that Esther's calling was about. You giving your life up for the lives of so many others. And I wonder what would happen if we would be willing to say, I'm going to be set apart and I'm going to give it all for Jesus. There's going to come a moment for you when it clicks. There's going to come a moment for you when God just meets you and everything changes. My dad describes this moment for me at a camp service. It was a normal moment for me. I didn't think anything of it. He said, I came home from that camp as a different person. But listen, it don't have to be at camp. It don't have to be in a service like this. It can be in your own home, because the same God that meets us there and here meets you in your room, meets you in your free time, meets you when you just say, God, I need you. See, God doesn't change, but our approach to him sometimes does. So we have to be willing to meet God because God is willing to meet us. It's going to be different tonight, right? I'm not going to call you to the front because I don't want to get to a place where we're relying on these times. Don't get me wrong. I believe God meets us in the altar, but I need you to be to a place where you're willing to pursue God. So if you're feeling God tug on your heart, guess what? I challenge you tonight when you go home, that's where you pursue God. That's where you press in. And that's where you go deep. So I'm not going to call the leaders to the front. I'm not going to have you pray, but what I am going to do is we're all just going to close our eyes for a minute, and I'm going to pray. And I encourage you to pray as well, to really take this challenge that I've commissioned you with and really see how it applies to you. And if God's pulling you to a deeper place, then tonight when you're at home, I want you to really pursue God. So Father, we thank you for tonight. We thank you for the opportunity to be set apart. We thank you for the opportunity, God, that you've given us to go to deeper places. I know, God, that it's difficult. I know it's challenging. I know it's tough. But Lord, I believe that you've created this generation to take the challenge. God, I know you're tugging on some students' hearts tonight. I know you're tugging on their hearts, calling them to deeper places. God, the challenge is simple, Lord. You're asking them to yield their youth, to give it all up for the cause of Jesus Christ. Take them to deeper places. Take them to a deeper place.